everyone for joining us for this webinar on When Good Shows Go Bad, presented by John Featherstone. My name is Mallory Misnarsic, and I'm the project manager here at Harman. A few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during this webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter, and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will also be recorded, and a link will be made available a few days after this presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control. We encourage you to look at the different webinars on our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional Training to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to John, the presenter for today's webinar. John founded lighting and design firm LightSwitch 25 years ago after moving to the US from the UK. Favoring elegant design and innovative cost-effective solutions, John has worked with clients as diverse as Virgin Galactic, John Legend, the NBA, and Electronic Arts. And now I'll pass it over to you, John.
Great. Thank you very much, Mallory. First of all, thank you very much to Harman for supporting this great series. I think it's really important that we all stay connected and try to use the lemons of the COVID situation to make some lemonade of learning. And Mallory, Laura, Heather, and Brad, thank you so much for curating these discussions. And most importantly, thanks to all of you for giving up a little time in your day to listen to me ramble on. I hope I make it worth your while. So what are we going to spend some time talking about today? Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about our company. I'm going to talk a little bit about shows, what we can do when things go wrong, how we can react, and how we can maybe think about the creative process a little differently. And I'm also going to try and give you some tools to become resilient. Resilient to change, resilient as a collaborator, and resilient as a steward of your own destiny. That sounds okay? Let's get started. First, a little bit of an introduction. 26 years ago, after a decade of touring with all kinds of bands ranging from Van Halen to INXS, The Cure to Janet Jackson, my dear friend Norm Schwab and I founded LightSwitch, a lighting and visual design collective, to help people tell stories. Because whether it's a theme park, a spaceship company, or a band, it's always about the story. Since then, we've been fortunate to be joined by partners and principals Howard Warner, Brad Malkus, Chris Medvitz, Tyler Elick, Warren Kong, and Tracy Deer to help us manage and grow the company. And we've grown from two guys at a kitchen table into a team of dedicated, talented, and diverse staff and employees of more than 50 designers, project managers, associates, and support staff in 6 cities worldwide: Chicago, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Orlando, and our Asian office in Hong Kong. Design, production, logistics, support, a collaborative studio. We work in 5 self-defined fields. The first is entertainment, theater, concerts, television, performing arts. The second is what we call environments, everything from exhibits to theme parks to trade shows. Thirdly, events, corporate experiences, galas and festivals, celebrations and attractions, and so on. And museums, which is both permanent museum projects for facilities all around the globe, to an expanding range of traveling exhibits, everything from Tutankhamun and the Golden Kings, Numbers in Nature, and the Treasure of the Vatican. We also focus on architectural projects with lighting design with the theatrical bent for the built environment. This is everything from high-end residential to the Writers Theater in Chicago to the truly massive NPK facility for Facebook. And we do lots of hospitality work, everything from Lucky Dragon to Single Thread to the Hong Kong Jockey Club. So the lighting design stuff is pretty easy to understand. But what do we mean by visual design? Well, that's everything from production design for concerts and TV projects and corporate events, and creating bespoke experiences for discerning clients and demanding audiences. Working most especially with my colleagues Austin Shapley and my fellow principal Chris Medvitz, we've developed a market creating holiday light experiences. These are non-traditional holiday light shows in arboretums and botanical gardens. So we help our clients conceive and execute memorable experiences for their gardens. All right, so let's dig into this a little bit more. Let's talk about one of the most interesting projects we've done for many reasons. We've been lucky to have a great long-term relationship with Virgin Galactic, and we've been working with Virgin Group almost as long as we've been working with Apple and Nintendo. From the announcement of the company at Wired Next Fest to the reveal of the design of Spaceship Two at the Rose Planetarium in New York, to numerous updates for their future astronauts and the unveiling of their line of spaceware, we've collaborated a lot. But back in the fall of 2009, with a team from Group Delphi we'd worked on the previous projects with, we received an RFP, request for proposal, for the next step in their progress to space, the rollout or unveiling of the complete Spaceship Two and White Knight combo. This was initially conceived as a daytime event, but Tony Erpelding from Group Delphi and I immediately thought, what if we could come up with something more dramatic? So the first challenge was the site. We ultimately decided that Spaceport in Mojave was the right site for the show, and scouted, re-scouted, and re-re-scouted the site, which was challenging in of itself. It's a mix of military skunk works type facilities, an aircraft boneyard, and research companies like Scale Composites, now the spaceship company, who make the spacecraft for Virgin. In other words, no one is very keen on a bunch of roadies tromping around with cameras and tape measures. But eventually we found this area all the way at the end of the runway with a nice, just poured concrete pad. It was perfect. So now we had our site. We'd surveyed the area. What to do with it? For the Wired magazine show Next Fest, we'd explored inflatable temporary structures, and they seemed a great fit. So the idea was floated of kind of a spaceport with some nods both to exploration and the real spaceport that Virgin at the time were building in New Mexico, which is now complete. So Tony led the design team, and we started white model site design that evolved into full-blown renderings of kind of a space camp with sort of these really cool, hip, ultra-lounge kind of interiors for people to be able to enjoy their experience. At this stage, the financial realities of busing nearly 1,000 people from LA sank in, and the client revised the scope to include a full press conference area, so the plans were refined and simplified a bit to include 2 large domes on the left side of this drawing for the party and a large clear tent on the right for the press conference. This would be repurposed as a lounge while the audience were watching the unveiling. Now the unveiling. What the hell are we going to do for the unveiling? So Virgin Galactic have a brand element they call the DNA of flight. It appears on everything from jackets to promotional materials to the spaceships themselves. It features from the bottom, first Daedalus. Oh, sorry, I jumped a slide. It features from the bottom, first Daedalus, then the Wright Flyer, then the Spirit of St. Louis, then a French plane, the Leduc 0101, which was a very advanced effort in ramjet engine design, the Boeing 747, the Lunar Lander, and Spaceship One, the winner of the X Prize, and where Virgin's path to space really began. So we've been coming up with we've been trying ways to incorporate these elements, UV paint on the runway, projection, bat signals. Nothing seemed right, or to have the scale for the event. Spaceship Two and White Knight together are huge. They're bigger than a 767. Then we got it. Why not create these giant iconography which supported this vision of Virgin's path? Giant, massive versions of these icons, align the runway with them, and throw them into silhouette as Spaceship Two rolled past. Kind of an honor guard, if you will, and a nod to the next step. So after some layout, we rapidly created an animation, and these are some stills from it. This was presented to the Virgin client, and they brought off, primed for victory, right? Now remember, this was originally conceived as a morning, daytime reveal, and a very English tea afterwards. Sometimes you've got to be bold with your ideas and believe your ideas are resilient too. So now we had our site design, the tent for the briefing, a reveal area, the icons spaced out half a mile of runway, and the party domes. We were ready, or as ready as we thought we could be. This is one of my favorite pictures, the morning of the rehearsal, with sun coming up over the Mojave Desert. We had a very nerve-wracking one night of rehearsals where we had just 2 runs with Spaceship Two before we presented this to the client. You've never seen such a fast-moving light focus in your life. So we were really ready, or really ready as we thought we could be, or as ready as we thought we needed to be. We even had our own little War of the Worlds moment with the locals calling the cops when we lit up the clouds, and to our immense and very geeky delight, we even made it into Gizmodo. Now, we all thought that was pretty cool. All rainbows, all unicorns, right? Well, we're going to come back to Virgin in a minute. But first, I'm often asked, how many shows do you do at the same time? What really makes a show successful? Who decides? So let's dig into this a bit. So how many shows do I do? How many shows do I think any of us do at the same time? I don't mean there's a dance show going on and a musical and a concert and you're working on them all at the same time. I mean the same show is always 4 shows at once. Confused? All right, let me break it down. Here's what I mean. I mean each show that we do is a balance of 4 at the same time. and keeping them in balance is optimal, but you should at least be mindful of the outcomes. So what are these 4 shows? Well, first, there's the show I do for myself. How do I keep rewarded? How do I keep engaged? How do I keep energized and activated? And frankly, how do I soothe my ego? We're all creative people, and we all have egos. 2, the show I do, we all do as part of a creative team, working with a director, very often not the client, despite what they may think, the sound designer, the scenic designer. If the sound guy has no positions because the lights are all in the way and we won't move them and the show doesn't sound great, we've all failed. 3rd, the show I do for my client, who may have a totally different vision than me and whom I may show my work and they may hate it and want it all changing. To coin a phrase I use on occasion, we'll do it any effed up way they want. And there's an important balance between 1 and 3. Clients often don't know exactly what they want and rarely ever get happier than really happy. And there can be diminishing returns in pushing beyond that point. You can actually start to go backwards and end up with a client that's less happy. Number 4, and this is the most important one, the audience. Ultimately, if 1 through 3 work and 4 doesn't, we've really all failed. And producers and clients can lose sight of the audience perspective. A great producer we work with frequently won't ever look at a cue for longer than the audience will, because it's easy to overanalyze and overthink things. Often, there's a different outcome in each of these 4 areas, especially when shows go wrong. So let me give you an example. Let's go back to the Virgin show. There's another side of that show, and I'll leave our client to describe it. I'm going to try a video. Don't complain to Harmon if it's jerky. It's not their fault. We're pushing the boundaries of tech. So essentially, what happened here was the show had a different outcome than we thought. I don't know if you can hear Will, but he's talking about the day after the spaceship launch. We had a total destruction of the site as hurricane force winds came through and destroyed everything we'd spent 2 weeks building. It was unexpected and completely different than the outcome we were expecting. Shortly after the reveal was complete, while guests were partying away, the winds really picked up. And the site was hit with winds that were measured as hurricane force, and the destruction of the site was, well, devastating. And in the morning, when we got up, Sleepy Mojave looked a little bleak. When we got back to the job site, $50,000 moving lights blown around the site like tumbleweeds. The 10 and 2 dome structures and millions of dollars of equipment destroyed. But most importantly, the audience had become was safely evacuated. No one was hurt, not a scratch. That was because of a defined evacuation plan, and we're going to talk about planning in a minute. So does this event look like a success? Now, fortunately, Spaceship and White Knight were safely back in their hangar, and as I mentioned, thanks to rapid and decisive decision-making on the part of the production team, no one, not in the audience, not the client or the crew, was hurt. The show itself had been right at the edge of doable. Fortunately, the test pilot had, frankly, big brass balls and went for it, but it was blowing a gale. The smoke was all over the place. It sounded terrible at times, and you could frequently see hardly anything that was going on. It was a bit suboptimal. So what can you do to prevent this kind of thing happening? Well, really, nothing. But what you can do to lessen the impact is plan. Plan a lot. We live in strange times, so plan for bad weather. Sadly, plan for an active shooter. Plan for power failure. Plan, as the Virgin Group did, for an evacuation. We have a protocol in my studio where on every show, fader 1 is always clearly marked as an emergency fader, just in case. So anyone can go up to the console and bring up full white light. Slightly risky? Yeah, I guess you could say that. But much less risky than EMS, trying to deal with a crisis in the dark. And perhaps we can think of the end results of shows that feel like a failure with a different metric. So back to Virgin. So using the 4 shows idea, let's review. Was the show I did for myself as a creative designer a success? Did it feel like a success? No. Was the show I did as part of a creative team a success? No. But what about the clients? What about the audience? First, our client. He's not exactly a shrinking violet. The production rented a rock and roll tour bus for Richard Branson to use as a lounge. And the feedback that we heard was that his personal assistant had to almost physically restrain him from running out of the bus to kind of scream in the face of the storm. And he thought it was one of the best shows Virgin had ever done. Well, that sounds pretty reasonable. What about our audience? Well, Virgin Galactic's clients are on the sharp end of adventure tourism. These guys are, to quote a friend of mine, who is one of their fully accredited space agents, interested in swimming in a tank full of sharks that is carried on a rope bridge hanging from a helicopter on fire over a crevasse on K2. They are looking for the next great thrill, even if it is several $100,000 thrill. So what did they think? Well, by and large, they thought was great. This is what the media said. A little after 7:30, a couple of hours after the unveiling, and an hour after White Knight and Spaceship Two headed back into the hangar, the MC of the event made an announcement. Everyone needed to evacuate the tents and board buses to return home because of high winds. The decision was a wise one. Wind gusts soon reached hurricane force, and after half an hour after the announcement, the main tent was demolished by winds. Fortunately, everyone had been cleared from the site and no one was injured. Virgin said later in a release that the winds had reached over 116 miles an hour. As Branson put it in a later statement, we were fully expecting to be blown away by our beautiful new spaceship, but got a little more than we bargained for. While the winds wiped out the tents and the party, it didn't appear to dash the enthusiasm of Virgin Galactic or its guests, many of whom were looking forward to the day when they'd get blown away not by a gust of wind, but by the experience of a lifetime and a trip to space. With the unveiling of Spaceship Two, now no longer an artist's conception, but instead a real physical vehicle, that possibility is one step closer to reality. Well, I guess that was a pretty good review. Several guests reported they were impressed with the focus on safety and the way the Virgin Group were able to safely evacuate the site. Some people even commented that they thought it was staged. I guess on occasion, even reality isn't convincing. So was the show a success? For the technical crew, that's not how it felt after the event. We were more kind of shell-shocked. But our feelings of failure slowly changed to a feeling of success. Branson, always an in-the-trenches kind of guy, came over to the bar and bought the place out for the crew. And the feedback from the audience was amazing. Was it the show I hoped it would be? No. The aftermath, the loadout, dealing with insurance companies, was any of that rewarding or fun? No. But it was important to allow the client's sense of success to become ours and keep the four shows in balance. So that maybe means there is a degree of balance to this show. So maybe it was really like this. So it's important to keep perspective and keep the four shows in balance. And sometimes as creative people, we need to allow the victory of our clients and the victory and excitement of the audience to become our success too. And sometimes when we're sitting after a show and feeling that it didn't go as well as we could and people around us are expressing that they love the experience, we need to allow some of that to be infectious for us too. So let's talk a little about resilience. Our client Virgin are frankly the essence of resilience. You don't do the things Richard Branson has done, make the bold plans, take the chances without being resilient. Space is not for the faint of heart. And Richard is one of the nicest, most appreciative and aware of his crew's CEOs I've ever worked with. That's a sign of resilience too. So how do you achieve resilience? How did I achieve resilience? Well, like many things, it's like building a muscle. The first step to resilience is mastery. Too many times, people misquote the 10,000-hour rule regarding being a master. Its origin is from the Malcolm Gladwell book, Outliers, The Story of Success. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Malcolm Gladwell said you have to have 10,000 hours in a subject to be an expert, people will often state. The problem is, they're repeating a misquote from somebody else who probably hasn't read the book either. Gladwell never said you need 10,000 hours to be a master. He said you need 10,000 hours to be a phenomenon, to be so freakishly awesome, that to be such a standout amongst your peers, that sometimes your first name is enough to tell people who you are. Peyton, Madonna, Venus, Kobe, Oprah, Thor. But either way, it doesn't mean you're crap, you practice. You're crap, you practice. You're crap, you practice. Boom, you hit some magical 10,000-hour threshold, and you're an expert. Mastery is a continuum. And to achieve that mastery, unless you're fortunate enough to be born with it, you need first deliberate practice. Now, deliberate practice, what does that mean? Well, deliberate practice is how to become an expert, how to overcome adversity, how to have the tools in your toolbox for when good shows go bad. And most experts have done just this for hours and hours every day for years. Most of the theory of deliberate practice is based on another book by K. Anders Ericsson. It's called The Role of Deliberate Practice in the Acquisition of Expert Performance. And it has data for violin players, piano players, chess players, gymnasts, runners, swimmers, all kinds of athletes. The domain doesn't seem to matter. Deliberate practice is the key to developing expert performance. You perform your skill, you monitor your performance, you honestly evaluate your success, and then you figure out how to do it better. And repeat those sequences, repeat those steps over and over again, even in or especially in lockdown. And this is why things like this series that Harman are doing are especially important. This is a part of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice isn't always a lot of fun. You'll, of course, get better at your activity through just doing it, but the important part is the monitoring, evaluating, and figuring. And if we're in lockdown, lean into your peers, lean into your friends to help you assess this. There are tons of really great tools that can help us still practice our craft and refine our art, even in the middle of a lockdown. But just doing your activity won't make you an expert, even if you do it a lot. Becoming an expert takes all of these steps in deliberate practice, and also being mindful of what is not deliberate practice. Any of these activities will be useful, but their use is largely improving your skill, not monitoring and evaluating it. When you're trying to learn how to tell if you're doing well or poorly, a good teacher or an advisor can be a tremendous help. And if you're starting to feel like you're getting really, really good, watching an expert can help you recalibrate your self-evaluation. Nothing humbles me and brings me back down to earth by watching a show by people I admire like Bob Boniol or Roy Bennett or Peter Morse or Patrick Woodruff or Patrick Dearson. Everything else on this list is not deliberate practice. Taking a class, listening to a webcast, even a really good one, reading an article or a book, watching an expert perform, or teaching. None of those are parts of deliberate practice. So practice, do anything. These times are difficult. Many of us are in lockdown. Nobody is really doing any shows. But any kind of part of your art can be deliberate practice. When we do get back to work, be the person that's always there and apply the metrics of deliberate practice to what you do over and over. It will work, I promise, and you will have skills and tools that will be effective when your good shows unexpectedly turn bad. It will work, I promise. Number 2, follow some simple guidelines. Be an effective collaborator. This is pretty simple. Be open to ideas. Be open to the thoughts of your team. Push the boundaries. Number 2, be present. Don't be on your phone. Don't be distracted. Don't be thinking about a million things at once. Bring focus to your art and focus to your craft. Be open. Listen to others. We all get attached and emotionally invested in our projects and our art and our design. But listen to others. Be open to their ideas. Try to espouse the notion that there is no bad source for a good idea. Be focused. Bring your full attention to bear. Practice your deliberate practice. Make sure that you are doing one thing really well than several things badly. Be responsible. Take care of your peers, your environment, and also your client's budget. Be a good steward of your client's trust and spend their money as wisely as if it was their own. The last step, be mindful of the pursuit of perfection. Perfect is rarely appropriate or even achievable and carries a high cost. Ask yourself, is the last 1% really worth the cost? Good enough can be better than perfect if it leaves room for fun, for creativity, for collaboration, and for sleep. Apple are often used as an arbiter of design perfection, but I think they are, in fact, very, very good at defining how close to perfection to stop. Johnny Ive once said, I want to see a problem solved in a way that acknowledges its context. And that context is always defined by the real world, rarely by perfection. I think that's a really great quote. So I hope I've given you some insights into balancing the 4 shows, making certain that you're aware of the path to victory, and how to find triumph through adversity, and tools to become resilient. Resilient to change, resilient as a collaborator, resilient as a steward of your own destiny, and resilient when good shows go bad, and sure that you have the tools you need. Speaking of resilience, several people have asked us in these difficult times what we can do to share resilience and help others. We actively embrace diversity as part of our DNA at LightSwitch, and I know at Harman you do the same thing. But we have a challenge with making sure our pipeline of young talent is rich and diverse too. I encourage you to seek out ways to offer a helping hand to groups that support theatre in the community, especially in these difficult times, and especially with inner city projects. At LightSwitch, among other ventures, we are supporting Youth Speaks. Youth Speaks is creating safe spaces for positive societal change. Youth Speaks exists to shift the perception of youth by combating illiteracy, isolation, alienation, and silence, and creating a global movement of brave new voices, bringing their noise from the margins to the center. If you're interested in learning more, their website is above, and the next generation really can speak for themselves. Youth Speaks produces Brave New Voices, a nationwide community-focused performance and slam poetry competition. And we're working with them to support this important kind of ventures in interesting and, pardon the pun, illuminating ways to engage more kids in lighting and tech. There's more to follow on this, but there are many, many ventures like this, so get involved. The pipeline in our business needs help and needs support now more than ever. Many of the schools that we are proud to work with are crying out for professional influence, and as they try to reframe, looking into the autumn, how they're going to energize, educate, and train the next generation of people for our business. They're looking for the help of the industry and professionals like us. If you have some time on your hands, I guarantee there is an education establishment near you that will be very, very grateful of your help. Okay, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Now I'm off my soapbox. I think one of the really interesting parts of these and the things that I've enjoyed before are the discussion that comes afterwards. So I've tried to keep this to about half an hour, so I have plenty of time for a chat. So that's what I have to say. And now, Team Harman, back over to you for our dialogue and discussion portion.
Perfect. Great. Thank you, John. We do have a couple questions. So the first question, where do you look to for creative inspiration?
You know, I think that's actually a fabulous question. For me, and what I suggest to other people, is look at what energizes you and makes you happy. For me, I'm a bit of a nature fan. I far prefer being outside than being inside. So my inspiration often comes from the natural environment. I know it sounds like a cliche and, you know, pina coladas and getting caught in the rain, but sunrises and sunsets with one light are truly remarkable. The simple shadow play of light breaking through patterns of branches when you walk in the woods, the feeling, the way natural light makes people feel. You know, in our ventures, especially the ones we do for botanical gardens and arboretums, we're often trying to capture that sense at night and make it feel like you're in a transformed environment, but one that still feels natural. So for me, I look to the natural environment. I know one of my fellow principals at LightSwitch, Chris Medvitz, is incredibly motivated by music. That's where Chris goes to for his inspiration. Another one of my partners, Norm, I know that he gets inspiration by finding peace and being out on his farm with the animals that they have. So I think if anytime you find yourself in search of inspiration, and certainly what works for me if I'm having a creative block, is a couple of things. One is to focus on fundamentals and to look for creativity in simplicity. There's another great book. I know I feel like I'm plugging Barnes & Noble or Amazon here, but there's a great book called Crosstown Traffic, which is written by an author called Charles Shaar Murray, and it's about the intersection of American blues music and British early rock and roll. So it talks about the Stones and Jimi Hendrix, and it's nominally a Jimi Hendrix biography, but it's far broader than that. He says, the essence of brilliance and creativity is to simplify, 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 then exaggerate, exaggerate, exaggerate. So if I'm feeling creatively lost or lose my way on a project, I'll bring it back down to the most simple thing, start turning stuff off rather than turning more stuff on, or in my case, go for a walk. Chris might choose to listen to some music, but do what soothes you, feed your soul. I find often creativity is a wall that you can run into, or you can find a different way around it to get through that block. That makes sense?
Great. So we do have a handful of other questions. The next one is, if the evacuation order had been given prior to the reveal, would the client have still considered it a success?
Well, that's a great question. And I think in these times of shelter in place and lockdown, we've all been called to think about the notion of gathering together. And even though it's lovely doing this kind of thing and seeing your smiling face in Dallas and knowing there are other people out there, I am aching for that kind of connection. So do I think it would have been anywhere near of a success? Do I think Richard would have said it was one of his favorite Virgin projects? No, I don't. But I still think there is something about that collective shared experience that is important. And I think they would probably have thrown their hands up a little bit and gone, well, Mother Nature 1, Virgin Galactic 0. But I still think that gathering together of people and celebrating would have been a success. Clearly, seeing the spaceship come down the runway, watching Richard and the two respective governors from California and New Mexico break the bottle of champagne of the nose was a big kind of hero moment. But I think even in that situation, it's a great example of we'd have been crushed. We'd months and hundreds and thousands of hours of creativity and work vested in the project. And I know we've all had experiences where we haven't got to grab the brass ring or get across the finish line. But if the client gets their objective, we have to allow that, I suggest, we have to allow that to balance our disappointment and try and keep those different components in check.
Great. So going off the Virgin event, so after the Virgin event, did you go through a debrief process, and what was the top change you made to future shows as a result?
Wow, these are some great questions. Yes, I am a big fan of debrief. I mean, obviously, with a project that goes that awry, there's an enforced debrief because we find ourselves in the heady company of lawyers and insurance companies and that kind of thing. But I think debriefs are critically important because otherwise we leave gold behind. And I think sometimes it's as important to debrief the good shows as it is the bad. And I'll talk about what we learned in a minute. But there's a tendency to go, high five, rainbows and unicorns, that show was great, let's move on to the next one. But I think using this notion of trying to stay balanced with the different component constituencies of the show, understanding why it felt good and what was important is really useful. And I think at the moment, as an industry, we start to explore XR stages and remote experiences, which I refuse to call virtual experience because there's nothing virtual about them. They are a real thing. You're just remotely. Being really clear on what makes a good event is going to be gold to us, because the notion of getting everybody together in a room, putting on an exciting dynamic show, everybody stands up and cheers at the end, we understand what that feels like. In order to succeed with remote experiences, we need to get really clear on what that success looks like. So back to Virgin. I'm sorry, I got off on a tangent for a moment. Clearly, what we reinforce with the debrief, and there's a lot of credit due to Group Delphi, who produced the experience, and especially to David Wally, who kind of coordinated as production stage manager, not only the event, but also the evacuation. It really reinforced how important it is to have a plan and to act decisively. And I think what that means, and what we really enforced in our debrief, was have criteria. If it was a rolling set of kicking the can down the curb, it's very easy to get into the, well, all right, let's see what happens. Let's see if the storm blows through. Let's get 2 more inches of rain, and then we'll see what happens. We'll let another 6 inches of snow fall, and then we'll see what happens. But I think it's really important to have predefined tipping points and criteria at which you execute various different strategies, which are defined not in the moment of stress, hope, and optimism, which is a weird combination, but I think we've all been there, of a situation of crisis, but you define ahead of time in a way that is a little removed from the emotion of the moment. So in the days leading up to this, we knew the weather front was coming in. It was surprising how strong it was, but we knew a storm was coming. So criteria had been defined by the Group Delphi team and by our rock-solid technical director, Tom Bussey from Production Glue, about when we were going to essentially pull the ripcord. And I think that's a really important takeaway from these kind of things. What are the criteria and what are the times at which we're going to stand down the show, evacuate the audience, consider it an emergency? And I think we've all seen unfortunate examples in our industry where people were perhaps swayed in the moment by a hope of optimism and also a sense of not wanting to be the person, Johnny on the spot, or Janelle on the spot, whatever the female equivalent is, making the decision about go, no go. But if you've all agreed a criteria beforehand, winds are 100 miles an hour, that's at the safe load of beyond the safe load of the 10, we're going to be out 20 miles an hour before that. The snow load on the roof is 14 inches of snow. At 10 inches of snow, we're going to evacuate. The system around the outdoor experience, and I think this is largely focused on outdoor experiences, can handle 1 inch of rain an hour. So at 1 inch of rain an hour, we're going to evacuate people. I think having those criteria are really important.
Great. So a couple more came in. With the emergency slider on the board, how many and what kinds of people do you inform of that?
Great question. We would love, when we get back to shows for the industry in general, to have a discussion about a protocol. And we've talked to a number of health and safety people and a number of people that work at EMS, and it's a not uncommon complaint. They're like, look, you guys, the first thing you do when you come in the room is you turn off all the building lights. And in a lot of cases, especially in hotel ballrooms, you break or off the building lights. So we come into the space and it's pitch black, and we don't know how to get the lights back on again, short of rushing around with building people trying to find breaker panels. So on one side, we think there is an opportunity at the right time, and obviously that's when we're back to closer to doing events again, to have a think as an industry about how we can support first responders when they have their hands a little less full, with a protocol for how to get the lights back on in buildings. But who do we tell? We tell, obviously all the lighting crew know about it. Anybody else that is at front of house, the audio designer, the production stage manager, anybody else that is at that department head kind of level. I mean, obviously one of the reasons why we do it is, heaven forbid, the programmer, designer, operator has stepped away or feels unsafe and leaves the room. We want other people to know that that's how you activate it. Again, no emergency protocol is without its trade-offs. I'm sure we have all been in shows where everything has happened from somebody leaning on the wall panel and turning the lights on in the middle of the show, to a fire alarm getting accidentally tripped, to even on a couple of occasions, sprinklers going off. I wouldn't activate not having sprinklers, not having fire alarms, and not having EM lights, because on occasion they get tripped. So that's why I think a more robust decision about how to do it. We wanted to do something that was super easy, super clear and easy to define, and didn't rely on third-party technology. You know, we talked about e-stop buttons and key switches and all this stuff, but we wanted it to be really intuitive, you know, that somebody can walk up there and go, oh, emergency, I wonder what this does. So. Great.
So do you think that Virgin would shy away from holding an event in a similar environment now? Would your company reconsider participating in an event in a place such as that after this experience? That was a two-part question.
No, it's a really good question. I'm going to approach them backwards, because I'm going to speak for myself first and then put some words in my client's mouth. No, we would absolutely do it again. One of the things that I believe our industry is good at is creating amazing experiences and coming up with solutions that are simply incredible. And we are by far from the only company doing this. I look at some of the work that goes on in the concert touring field, in the special events field, that people create these amazing experiences. And I think that's how, when we all get back to shows, we're going to remind everybody how important the gathering for live events is, that we're going to create these live experiences that are remarkable. So the more distinctive and the more bespoke an experience feels, frankly, the more excited I am to be involved. You know, I was listening to some of my colleagues from our San Francisco office yesterday talking about the experience they did for the 75th anniversary of the Golden Gate Bridge. Incredibly challenging for a whole myriad of ways that I won't go into here. But it was a unique and distinct experience that caused a whole bunch of thinking out of the box. So if we knew that there was going to be a hurricane force wind and we knew that the tent was going to collapse and we knew that there was going to be this aftermath, we would have planned it differently. But if they come back to us and say, we're going to do another event at Mojave, are you in? The answer would be heck yes. I mean, especially in the moment, but in general anyway. For Virgin, yeah, I mean what I said, Virgin are really resilient, and anybody that follows the news will realize that Virgin have had some really tragic setbacks in their path to space, but I believe that they feel what they do is important, and that continuing to push the boundaries, just as I know that Virgin have great respect for everything that SpaceX are doing, pushing the boundaries of exploration. So again, with the benefit of 2020 hindsight or 2020 foresight, would they risk their multi-million-dollar spaceship to 110-mile-an-hour winds? Probably not. Would they risk their audience? No. But would they create a compelling experience for their audiences? It's what they do. It's in their DNA, whether we're doing an event for them, which is viewing the eclipse and going to the foothills of the Tetons, or taking future astronauts into the assembly plant where they build the spaceships. They're always about creating a distinctive experience. And I think that's really important. And frankly, I think that's why we're all a bit sick of Zoom calls, because they're not a distinctive experience. You know, they don't quicken the pulse. You know, Daniel Burnham, the designer of Chicago, said, make no small plans, because they do not quicken the blood and will soon be forgotten. And I think that's the essence of a show like Virgin, is it's a distinct experience.
Great. So the next question is, hindsight is 2020, but that being said, what would you have done differently? And I also say, congratulations on a beautiful show.
Well, firstly, thank you. There's a line that I trot out. I'm a man beloved of quotes. There was a 40s baseball player who had a wonderful name, Lefty Gomez, and he always used to say, it's better to be lucky than good. And we were certainly lucky that night. What would we do differently? If we had known it was going to be like that, I think what we would have probably done is and obviously this was a weather anomaly. And I'm sure everybody that views this will look at their career and go, that was a weather anomaly. Certainly those people that work in concert touring will go, that was a really shitty day. That totally sucked. We were drying lights with hairdryers for days after that. If we'd have known it was that day, I think we would probably have rescheduled and pushed it back a little bit. In terms of the site itself, it's hard to imagine how else the tent company could have stopped the tent blowing away, short of building a building. And you get into diminishing returns, whereas one of the tent guys said afterwards, he said, with those kind of winds, eventually what you end up with is not just a collapsing tent, but a collapsing tent that's throwing blocks of concrete all over the place while it's doing it. I think we would have done, if we'd have known, and again, this is getting into the weeds of 2020 hindsight, if we'd have known at 9:46 the winds were going to get that high, we'd have pushed the show earlier. If we'd have known that day, I think we'd have done the show later. But I think the fact that we did an event like that, we had an unfortunate situation happen, but thank you to, we must acknowledge, a good amount of luck and good fortune and good karma, but some really great planning on the parts of the whole production team, but especially Group Delphi and Production Glue. We were mindful of this being an eventuality. And when I was talking before about planning and being resilient, that's what I meant. Just keep planning.
Great. So the next question is, what do you think the next big innovation will be to hit the lighting industry?
The next big innovation to hit the lighting industry is going to be doing these things we call shows again. And I can't wait. You know, it's always fascinating. Every time Greg Jones invites us to come out to the mind-blowing Experience Center in Los Angeles, it never ceases to amaze and impress the work that the R&D team, and before everybody goes, oh no, he's going to blow his NDA, but before the Harman R&D team are doing. I think what we're going to see is a continued development of LEDs, which I hear are going to be big. But I'm excited to see the next generation of light sources. I think there is some interesting developments going on in plasma-type sources. I think we're going to see fixtures which are, you know, it's felt like there's been a sort of homogenization, which is understandable from a manufacturer's standpoint, about trying to create a light that does many, many things. And what's interesting for us as designers is we want lights that do a few things really well. You know, it's sort of be a master rather than a sort of jack of all trades. So I think we're seeing continued development of brighter fixtures with less power. We're continuing to see the push into interesting new sources. I know that from an optical standpoint, these arrays of multiple LEDs are really challenging, and getting down to one super bright engine again is going to enable us to do interesting things from an intensity standpoint. I think there's obviously some interesting developments, especially amongst the Italian contingent, with laser sources for fixtures as well. So I think there are all of these really interesting offshoots of development going on that are going to create more efficient, brighter sources. And I think one thing that our industry can do better at is be safe stewards of our environment from an environmentally friendly standpoint. And so no pun intended, explosion of lower energy fixtures, I think is really exciting, because the less electricity we can use, the less power a fixture is using when it's not actually emitting light, the more responsible we're being of our natural environment. And frankly, live shows are mass users of mass power. And I think the better we can, every step we can get to be better with that is really exciting.
Great. So we have a couple more. So the next one is, how do you track your personal performance as a designer? Do you use a spreadsheet or journal for your self-evaluation?
Oh, these are some really great questions. There are some things here. This is a presentation that I often do for college kids, and there's a couple of things from these questions I'm going to put in. That's a brilliant question. Personally, I'm a note taker, so it is a lot like journaling. We have project folders for every project at LightSwitch, and there's a master document in there that covers everything from client information. Hey, just so you know, this client doesn't really like green, to those kind of notes. So the more pragmatic stuff goes in there. What worked, what didn't work, and then when we are back to doing shows, we're fortunate that certainly in the corporate world, a lot of the projects are year over year. It's the annual sales meeting, it's the biannual sales meeting. So it's important that we keep track of anecdotal practical things, so the client doesn't go, yeah, but last year I told you I didn't like green, and now you're using a ton of green again. For me personally, I like to do something that's probably more akin to journaling, that is notes and thoughts, and frankly, a lot of the more emotional parts. As an aside, not to plug, but I'm a big fan of the idea of life coaching. I think there is no real professional avenue where the notion of a coach doesn't improve performance, especially obviously in sports. And I don't think any professional sports person would do anything other than go, well, yeah, of course I have a coach. What are you, crazy? Yeah, that's how I get better. And I'm a big fan of life coaching because I feel that helps me get better. And a lot of the time I'll review projects, especially ones that didn't go great, with my life coach, you know, and he'll do what a coach does, which is sometimes go, oh, that really sucks, that didn't go well, I'm sorry. Or sometimes go, oh, you idiot. What did you think was going to happen? That, you know, you'd predefine that situation. And I think that sense of talking to somebody else. So for me, I put pragmatic stuff in our project folder so that we end up with a shared database of information for the company. I make notes and journal my thoughts and, frankly, emotional stuff about the project. And then I talk to somebody else. It doesn't have to be a coach. It could be a peer. It could be somebody you trust. And I think one thing that's really important is remaining honest about failure. You know, one of the things that Norm and I talked about with the kind of company we wanted to have with LightSwitch is an odd expression, which is somewhere where it's safe to fail. And that doesn't mean that we go, yay, you failed, hooray. But with what we do with working creatively, you can never be bold unless you're prepared to fail. And you can never feel safe unless you're in a place where you feel that you're safe to fail. Now, obviously, that means there are implications and ramifications, sometimes serious, of failure. But what we try to do at LightSwitch, we don't always achieve it, but we keep trying, is go, okay, so you failed, but you failed because you were being daring. You know, you failed because you were being bold. You failed because you were trying to do something remarkable. There's an argument to be made that Virgin failed in the process of doing a remarkable show. But individually, I think we get really focused on our successes and a little less comfortable talking about our failures. But there's a ton to learn there. So I think talking to your friends and going, that really didn't go the way I thought it was going to, will you help me understand past the emotion, why it didn't go that way. I think that's incredibly valuable. But whoever sent that question, thank you for that. That's a really good question. That's going in V6 or whatever it is of this deck. So.
Great. So the next question is, how do you know when you reach good enough so that you stop striving for perfection?
Wow, that's a great question. Again, I think often as servants of our master's wishes, if you will, we need to be comfortable surrendering that. And I have a really hard time with this myself. I work on this a lot myself, is when the client comes and goes, that looks great. I'm super happy. Are you going to be done now because you're spending my money? Going, okay, there's a couple of things, maybe I need another 10 or 15 minutes, but allowing the metric of the person who is paying you to be your barometer for happiness. Now, that doesn't, this is a nuanced piece, because I think one of the things our clients look to us for as professional consultants is to help them push a little bit, but just enough. And I think we all have seen this and are familiar with this in personal relationships, that you can push somebody to the point, frankly, where they start to push back. And I think when the clients start to push back and go, it's great, I think that's good enough. And I think finding that point is really important in your personal relationship with who's hired you, whether it's a corporate client for an event, whether it's a club owner if you're working in a club and you're just getting started, whether it's a band if you're working for a band, is ultimately people are trusting us to execute their vision, not empowering us to execute our own. And I think that's really important to stay focused on. I will, as Dennis Connors and Troy Fujimura and Chris Merriman and and Chris Herman and all the really patient people who program for me will attest, I will do what my life coach calls fixing something till it's really broken. And I'll noodle away at stuff. And I think finding that line for yourself that is a balance of your own creative ego and your client's desires and going, okay, this is good enough. If you continue to do deliberate practice, you'll become familiar with where that point is. And a lot of the time, I can certainly read it in the energy of the people around me. When I get the eye roll and really, we're looking at that cue again. It's like, okay, well, actually, maybe it's okay. How about we grab a cup of tea? So.
Great. Well, that looks like all the questions that came in. I want to thank everyone for joining, and thank you, John, for your time. This is a great presentation.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And
Perfect.
Good work, Team Harmon, for doing these. It's a really great thing you're doing.
Perfect. I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you, everybody. Take care.
John, that was an excellent job. Thank you so much.
You are most welcome. I sense from people I've talked to that if they go too long, you start to get some attrition. So I want to try and keep it to half an hour of me and then let people ask questions, which they did. So that seemed like that was reasonable. I hope the length was okay. We were a little under an hour.
Yeah, no, this is perfect.
Okay, good.
Bye, everyone.
Okay. Well, everyone take care. Heather, congratulations again.
Thank you.
And Brad, you be well. And Mallory, congratulations to you as well, and to your twin on her arrival as well.
Bye, guys.
Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.
Bye.